Great. Well, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for coming out. One of the biggest problems that we have with this referendum, as Dan has mentioned, is that voters don't know much about it. In the last poll, public poll that came out, said about 33% were undecided. Unfortunately, this is the most fundamental, essential part of our democracy, how we choose how we're governed. Who is going to go to Victoria, make laws, make regulations, and do all the things necessary to govern our great province. And unfortunately, this is exactly what we have continually said. Proportional representation is complicated and it is confusing. So is my PowerPoint, apparently. So briefly, how many people were at the Kamloops AGM? I know a couple of people were there, yeah. Okay, good, you won't know my spiel. So I introduced myself there. I'm kind of a dissident New Democrat. I don't agree with the party position on proportional. I opposed it in 2005, I opposed it in 2009. It became NDP policy sometime around 2005. But I'm a dissident New Democrat, but about a third of New Democrat voters by most polls are in favor of keeping first past the post, and a surprising number, over 20% of Green voters are the same way. I'm a dissident because of a number of things. I've run a business successfully for 20 years. I'm not a social worker or teacher. Not that there's anything wrong with that, don't get me wrong. My daughter's a teacher, so I'm very supportive of the teaching profession. I drive a V8 Mustang, I'll admit it, I don't drive a Prius. I ride a motorcycle. I obviously am opposed to the party's position, and I got rid of a tax. So you add all those things up, I'd say dissident New Democrat. Anyway, so I'm happy to be here and talk about proportional, and there we go. And I should actually, I don't usually use this, so I don't know what's going to happen. We know this. For 142 of our years, proportional representation has been absent, and first past the post has been our system, and we've created a very strong, a very stable, very successful economy. And we've had different governments. We've had New Democrat governments, we've had social credit governments, we've had BC Liberal governments, and all of them have made significant changes to our province and built our province, and each one had their opportunity to do what they thought was right, and then the voters decided. And one of the fundamental differences between what we are currently with our first past the post system and what Maria and the proportional representation people are talking about is we have 87 different elections. Each community, each riding decides who is the best person to represent you in Victoria in the legislature. And you vote on that, and you have local accountable representation. Under proportional representation, it is one election. It's province-wide. It's whatever numbers show up. And frankly speaking, in Kelowna, we know where most of the votes already reside. They're in Metro Vancouver. Metro Vancouver already has an enormous number of seats, but under proportional representation, it will have the most votes and the ability to decide government. That is a significant problem to me. I'm living in Vancouver, but I've lived in Burns Lake, I've lived in Tofino, I've lived in Abbotsford, and I don't think that people who are outside of Metro Vancouver should have their representation reduced further. There's some limitations on it right now, but to reduce it even further would be a big mistake. Why are we having the referendum? Well, it's pretty obvious. These two guys. Both party policies, NDP and Green, to be fair, are in favor of proportional representation. I fought that. I didn't win that particular convention vote, but that's the way it goes. Now, what happens if we had proportional representation? Maria's giving you the unicorn version. I'm going to give you the more nasty version of it. This is kind of a sample ballot we did up. This is not uncommon at all in proportional representation, mixed member proportional. Every one of the three proposed systems would dramatically change our democracy in our province. And we would dramatically reduce local representation, but it would at the same time increase the opportunity for extremist groups and one-issue parties to actually have not only representation in our legislature, but the balance of power in our legislature. A 5% threshold, Maria said it's a high threshold, but in fact, right now, the Green Party, with holding just 3 seats, has the balance of power. They got to choose who would become the government. They had negotiations in back rooms with the NDP and the BC Liberals, and that's what happened. Under proportional representation, we will have perpetual minority governments. This is the first time in 65 years we've dealt with this. But under proportional, every single time you'll have a minority. And that means that when you go out to vote for the party of your choice, it may not make any difference whatsoever, because the party that holds the balance of power is the tail that wags the dog. And we have to look no further than New Zealand, which has a mixed member proportional system, which is one of the 3 ballot options, where the New Zealand First Party, led by a guy named Winston Peters, who's described as the Donald Trump of New Zealand, He got 7% of the vote. His party got 9 seats as a result of that. They did not win a single geographic riding in the entire country of New Zealand. Not one. Not his leader's seat. None of his MPs were elected through that. They all came from proportional lists, party lists that the party decided. But because they got 7%, they got 9 seats. They went into secret negotiations in the back rooms. They decided with their executive, who people don't know who they are, and they decided to make Labour the government. Previously, they made the National Party, the right-wing party, the government. So a party with 7% of the vote decided who's in power. Winston Peters became, guess what, the Deputy Prime Minister. He became the Deputy Prime Minister. They've got a major influence on their policies, and they couldn't even win a single seat. And not only could they not win one, they hadn't won one since 1996. No riding would elect them. And so when I hear about the possibility that 5% would get you roughly 5 seats in our legislature, I think any party that could get 5 seats could have all sorts of extreme views. And people have said I'm fear-mongering, but I've looked at Sweden. 18% voted for the Sweden Democrats, a party with clear neo-Nazi links. In Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, it won 94 seats in the last election, caused an enormous problem for Angela Merkel, a very anti-immigration party with lots of roots in the past of neo-Nazism and still current problems with it. They won, again, also Germany is under mixed member proportional. They won 94 seats. 91 of those 94 seats are from party list. They only won 3 constituencies in all of Germany. So when we see this over and over, we say, do we want to give up our local accountable representation? If you have an MLA from any party, BC Liberal, NDP, Green, whatever, and they don't do a good job, or you don't like their party, you can get rid of them. But you only get rid of them in your riding. You can change them in your riding. And under our unique legislation, you can recall them as well if they really misbehave. You lose that. In New Zealand, they just passed something with the New Zealand sense of humor called whack-a-jumping, the whack-a-jumping law. And what that means is if, my friend Rick Thorpe is here, who's been working with us, if Rick went rogue on Gordon Campbell and said, I'm sitting as an independent or a BC Conservative, whatever, Gordon Campbell, under whack-a-jumping, could throw him out of the legislature. Not just out of the party, out of the legislature. That just passed in New Zealand. So anybody who steps out of line with the party leader, boom, they're gone. You vote against the party, boom, you're gone. That kind of draconian situation in an MMP country, to me, makes me very, very nervous. So I think there's a whole bunch of other reasons. I wanted to address some of Maria's points, and I want to remember that I have a PowerPoint, because I might have a good slide. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, this is one of the caucuses we'll be seeing. We want to talk about stability. I mean, you're all business folks. I'm a business person, or mostly business folks. Italy, 66 governments in 72 years under proportional representation. That's not 66 elections. That's things collapse. Governments collapse during the sessions of their parliament. And you wonder why there's no stability and and economic problems in some of these countries. Spain, Greece, Italy, all proportional representation. So when you see the actual instability that happens, you think about yourself as a business person. Would you want to invest in a country where the government's going to change roughly every 12 to 14 months? And you won't know what the policies are. You won't know what the programs are. You want to make a major investment like LNG, billions of dollars worth, and you think, well, I don't know what's going to happen. Andrew Weaver might pull the plug, which is a distinct possibility, by the way. But I don't think it's going to happen. So those kind of problems are enormously challenging. We also talked about, this is just the Sweden election, just happened. Extremely scary to me. And you know, kind of on a personal note, I take, again, people have been unhappy with me from the other side. Not Maria. Maria and I are friends, by the way, so I'm not aiming things at her. Yeah, so far. We may test that today. But my father lived through the Nazi occupation of Holland. I'm of Dutch heritage. And he joined the Dutch resistance and fought against fascism in Germany, as did many other people. And the idea that a party like we see in Sweden, unfortunately the Netherlands Freedom Party, in Germany, all these parties which have neo-Nazi links, and the idea that they could win seats in a proportional representation election with just 5% of the vote anywhere, including British Columbia, is absolutely abhorrent to me, and I never, ever will accept that. Never. That is not what we are about in British Columbia. It's not what we're about in Canada. And there's too many situations we've already seen around the world. We have to look to Europe and say, if 5% of people decide that this is a good idea, that we want to throw out immigrants, that we want to ban Muslims, we want to ban the Quran, as the Netherlands Freedom Party says, ban the Quran, close the mosques, and throw them out of the country. That kind of extremist views is absolutely wrong for Canada and for British Columbia. But it would allow a party with 5% of the vote to have 5 seats. And as I've said, the tail has wagged the dog in several other countries. I think that Maria mentioned false majorities and distorted outcomes. I don't believe that, because the fundamental difference, again, is under first past the post. It's simple, it's stable, it's successful. A community sends somebody to the legislature, the party or parties with the most seats have a majority. And it's a majority of the seats. It's not 51% of the vote, it's 50% plus 1 of the seats. And that's community by community, and guarantees that rural and non-urban communities have fair representation. And that's what our system, that's the great advantage of our system. So there are no wrong winner elections. There's the appropriate winner election. Maria also mentioned that Courtney Comox, 200 people decided. Well, in New Zealand, 7% decided who'd be the government, who'd be the prime minister. You can't say 200 people decided the election and then say we have to make every vote counts. Every vote counts. Ask Christy Clark in 2013 if every vote counted. Ask Ron Ray Leonard and Comox Courtney this election. Of course they do. But we can't all win. We can't all have our way with things. Politics is about making decisions, and voters make decisions. They make the best decisions possible, and they look at all the facts and they decide who will represent us best in our community. It's not a party list. It's not somewhere where at the top of the party list under mixed member proportional, 40% MLAs. Guess who's going to be number 1? The party leader. Guess who's going to be number 2? The assistant party leader. Guess who's going to be number 3? The deputy assistant party leader. You'll never get rid of those folks, no matter what you vote in your community, because they'll always be the top of the list. So there's a lot more. I want to hear your questions. I know that you'll have questions for both of us, but I think that in essence, the idea of a complicated and confusing system, 2 of the 3 systems have never been used anywhere in the world. Mixed member proportional is the only one. It's used in Germany and New Zealand, in Bolivia and Lesotho, and nowhere else. And the other 2, one's an invention by a mathematician at the University of Alberta who'd love to have his experiment tried out by BC real live voters, which would be a pretty big experiment. I'd give him full credit if he gets that through. That's the dual member proportional. Which would also blow up every riding, would double the size of every riding, and then we would have 2 MLAs. Oh, do I have another minute? How am I doing on time? You're going to give me 1 minute? Okay. So 30 seconds. I can do it maybe. Dual member proportional. So Rick Thorpe and I decide to join up, and we run for election, and Rick gets 10,000 votes, and he wins this riding, and I get 9,995 working with Rick, and you'd think I'd be the second MLA. But somebody else in the room who ran for another party, let's call it the blue party, not to pick on the Greens, they got 5,000 votes. So you'd think there's no way they won. But the blue party got a lot of votes. They got 5% of the vote. And the blue party candidate in this riding got the most votes of any blue party candidate. That person is the second MLA for this riding, not me. That's how that system works. You don't vote for individuals either. You vote for the party on dual member proportional. Anyway, there's lots more to say, and it is complicated and confusing, as I said, but I thank you for coming out and showing some good civic interest in this very important issue, and please tell your friends, read all you want, and vote however you wish, but do take a good, strong look at this, because it's very scary to me.